When we are feeling down and in a negative space, we're vibrating at a low frequency. And so what's going to end up happening? Low frequency people are going to find us. Mm-hmm. And so we won't have to work hard. In our miserable state, misery finds company. That's how it works, right? So if we know that we're in a state where we want to raise our frequency or raise our love energy, negotiate ourselves into a position around high frequency people or high vibrational people, high love energy people.
Yeah. Welcome to Living God's Light, a podcast to help you strengthen your spirituality and your connection with God. We are so happy to have you as a part of the Living God's Light family.
Welcome to the Living God's Light podcast. I'm Alan Smith, and today I'm here with
Lynn Taylor,
Lindsay Young,
and Vinny Tolman.
And today our topic is avoid negative influences. We talked a little bit about this beforehand, which was really interesting because the previous podcast we were talking about filling
kind of the power of creation.
The power of creation, filling that space with positive things. And now we're kind of focused on the inverse.
Yeah, like don't do this, instead introduce more of this. So this one's point blank.
I like to think of it more in the flow of understanding what the negatives are and negotiating yourself around them. Mm-hmm. And really that's what it is. It's not, label them and be anti-negative influences. Mm-hmm. It's just understanding what are your negative influences. I think that's a very viable conversation that we could all have with ourselves. What are our negative influences? For some of us could be social media, some of us could be news, some of us could be certain friends in this very room. Just kidding.
I'm just kidding. I'll try to do better.
But really, it's the awareness, right?
It is the awareness.
If you're not aware of what's happening, what your roadblock is, what's in front of you that may be causing the problem, then how are you supposed to get around it? How do you...
And I think one of the reasons why this one's so important is because when we are feeling down and in a negative space, we're vibrating at a low frequency. And so what's going to end up happening? Low frequency people are going to find us. Mm-hmm. And so we won't have to work hard. In our miserable state, misery finds company. That's how it works, right? So if we know that we're in a state where we want to raise our frequency or raise our love energy, negotiate ourselves into a position around high frequency people or high vibrational people, high love energy people. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I love the word that you used earlier when you said flow, because the image that comes to my mind is if you're river rafting and you're following the rapids and there's different currents and eddies and stuff, and sometimes you can choose which of those channels you're going to go down. Mm-hmm. And you're looking ahead and you see rocks ahead. That rock is going to be a negative influence on your journey down that river.
Depends on your captain. I've been on one of these rafts where the captain's like, there's rocks, let's go for it. And it's like, no.
Well, so it depends. So I'm talking about not like the making your journey a little more exciting. I'm talking about the sort that you're going to smash into.
Oh, that's going to kill you. Yeah,
different
definitely.
Kind of rock. So
definitely.
But you can see that. So those kind of rocks you want to avoid.
Absolutely.
Sometimes, you want to challenge yourself. Like for me, going to the gym would be rocks, but but they're not the kind that I'm going to smash myself against. They're the kind that kind of make life a little bit more challenging and make me stronger as a result.
Right.
But because I'll admit, when I'm on the river, I love the rapids. Mm-hmm. Love the rapids. And when I was flying fighters, I loved being down in the valleys and down where it is more dangerous down there, but it's more fun. So, but you still do it safely. So in the same sort of a way, if you're aware of things that you want to avoid, kind of like last time when we were talking about the power of creation, and I gave the example of the grass, you don't, like you said, you don't want to focus on the negative, but you want to be aware of it. Mm-hmm. You fill the yard with grass to choke out the weeds, but there's still going to be some weeds, and so you deal with them. So I see this more as an awareness, and again, like you said, the flow. Yeah. So you can flow around them. If they are in your path, you can figure out a way to navigate them in a way that you're not smashing up against them.
I think it's important to identify too what are our own negative influences. Like take inventory on what it is for you, because maybe what society has laid out as a negative influence, it may not be so much for you. That's not much of a trigger point or something that draws you, but taking personal inventory on the things you know that bring your vibration down, bring you to a frequency that you are not at your optimal state. What are those things? And then go from there.
Well, I'm thinking about, we have a friend, Benjamin Hardy, who wrote a book that is Willpower Doesn't Work. And one of the key points in his book was that of changing your environment. And I think that when we think about negative influences, it can be, I'm just going to talk about food because there are certain things that I love, but I know they're not good for me.
Coke Zero.
Yeah, Coke Zero.
God bless you.
Yeah, I love that. That's one of my favorites. But it could be anything for any specific person, right? I also happen to love pastries in any way, shape, or form.
Are you saying that's negative?
Well, it is if that's all I eat.
That's true.
All right.
And so if I know that that's a weakness of mine, maybe I just don't put a Coke Zero in the fridge. And so then I have to wait longer for it so that I drink less. Or I don't drive by my favorite Maverick store to fill up my 44-ounce drink cup as often. Or, what are some things that you can change in your environment? How can you change your environment
to like that
avoid those things?
That old commercial with the gal that she had a hard time spending with her credit card. So she froze it in a block of ice. Do you remember that commercial? And so for her to use it, she'd have to go and
to chip it out
so she could use it. It's just, get in front of the distractions, get in front of the things that are your detractors, the things that are going to lower your energy.
Another thing that comes to mind is if sometimes those negative influences are people establishing boundaries. And you don't need to necessarily sit the person down and say, we're going to establish some boundaries. You might...
That might not go over so well.
Yeah, it might not. But you can maybe give some space before you respond. Or you can encourage them to, hey, instead of texting, send me an email. Or, hey, let's get together and talk about all these things at once instead of you piecemealing my day 5 minutes at a time and interrupting my flow. There's all these different...
It's a message to me.
No, absolutely not.
Because I always text. I'm texting Lynn, and then I send him a Discord, and then I send him... So.
Well, that comes to another thing is also make sure that you set up your environment. Like when I'm in my creative space, I make sure that the distractions just don't hit me.
Yeah.
I will see the text when I get to it. And for the people that absolutely have to get in touch with me, they have ways. But I've created Discord, the systems to where, no, never hesitate.
Giving you crap.
I know you are. But I've created the space to where, and sometimes the influences aren't necessarily negative. They just don't help what I'm doing right then. And so you create the environment, now we're going back to the power of creation, you create the environment that helps act as a shock absorber or diverts those distractions, those things that lower your vibration in the moment, so they appear when you're ready for them instead of just coming out of the blue.
I love this principle too because it can apply to us in so many different ways. The principle itself we can apply just to our cell phones. We could apply it to our social behaviors, our social connections, to our home environment. There's a lot of negative energy out there. There is. There really is. We know it's there. We all feel it. How many of us have been in not a good place and someone comes and seeks us out, like the very last person we want to see, and now we got to spend an hour to try to just make it through. And understanding that we can avoid these things and set up parameters like that honor you and honor your strengths, it puts you in a completely different position. But I think just recognizing the different influences that are negative are really important, because identifying them is the first step. And then the second step is to begin the avoidance process or alignment process. Yeah.
And something else that you had mentioned about the kind of the like attracts like, that it's also important to not be a negative influence.
Yes.
And if you're filling your life being yourself a positive influence on other people, you're going to attract people that want to be a more positive influence on you. And maybe that's why Lindsay is messaging me all the time, is because I like that positive influence in my life.
You really flipped that around on me. Thank you. Thank you, Lynn. I mean, really, I think that just taking an inventory on what is our negative influences and what can help us, be the most successful is really an act of self-love. It all comes back to the love we show ourselves. It's just being aware of those things that may be harder for us. And, I've been in addiction recovery. I'm aware of the things that negatively pull me down, and the environment, circumstances, it's pretty much vital to just have awareness of those things in order to maintain and make good decisions to come.
Something that struck me as you guys have been talking is, as we're talking about negative influences, those can change. They're not always going to be the same things in our lives that are maybe bringing us down or that are the energy suckers. They can change. So how do we manage that process when things change and we're trying to avoid them and suddenly it's something else that's causing that negative? Is there an identification process maybe that we can have in our lives that helps us understand?
Well, it's funny because once you think you've got it figured out, it changes.
Yeah.
So we have to constantly be in the flow of that. And that's really what this is all about.
Back to flow.
Is
Back
flow.
to flow.
Yeah. And what happens if we become a good flower? We get to blossom into the flower that we're always meant to become. And being that flower of energy, constantly realigning, constantly redirecting in our life, that's going to allow the progress of momentum to move us forward. And it's when we don't, that's when we are going to hit against the rocks. That's when we're going to have way more setbacks, way more obstacles. So I think that getting out in front of it, recognizing the threats, avoiding them, embracing our intention to go towards the positive, being proactive instead of reactive, is very different. And we can change our own lives doing that.
I keep hearing words that are just resonating with me as we're going through this and talking about it. It's intention, boundaries, being proactive. I think those are some really great words that are just keep coming up as we've talked about this.
Awareness.
So awareness, being aware of all of those things and being able to navigate, I think is a really great thought process. So
I think, and having awareness to me means in a place of non-judgment. So really you can be aware of your negative influences, maybe some things that may suck you in, maybe some places that you'd rather be. Other than there, it's like the awareness is really just is. And you can be in a place of awareness to identify those negative influences.
I'm going to borrow your card. Sorry, go ahead.
The end.
Oh. Okay, so I'm going to borrow this little reference card that we've got here, realizing how much these principles build on each other. So the first one, and think about how each of these play with and interact with avoiding negative influences. So being authentic, knowing the purpose of life, loving everyone, listening to your inner voice, using technology responsibly, releasing all prejudice, and the power of creation. They all build on each other and they all play with or interact with that avoiding negative influences.
They all really
love
do.
that.
I think that it's all about our ability to navigate. Our intention plays into that. And as we start to navigate and look at our life and we're being really intentional in the things that we do and following those things, it really brings us into a place of power. It brings us into a place of self-knowledge and understanding who we are and how to do that well. That just makes me really happy to think about as we work through these principles that we have more ability and more strength and more focus around being who we are and who we want to be. I love the idea of, as we're looking at this, who are we becoming? As we're working on these principles, who are we becoming? I just love the idea of being aware of that and being able to experience this from a different perspective. So, like I always do, I'm going to give you guys something to work on this week. Where are you going to place your boundaries? Where are you going to focus on becoming and using those things to help you avoid those negative influences? Anything that comes to mind for you guys?
The first thing that came to my mind, and that I think I want to do this week just as an experiment and to get to know myself a little better, is really just turn on my gauge. Actively be aware that today I'm going to go out with my gauge and gauge my interactions and things I choose to do off of, is this fulfilling me or is this drawing energy from me? Whether it's connecting, with others or a work project or, parenting of some kind, but just to have a self check-in on how do I feel about how I am approaching this right now, and the thing that's in front of me, is it influencing me positively, negatively? How can I change it? So turn on my gauge.
I love that. I'm generally a very optimistic person. And so negativity for me isn't generally a problem, but I know of a couple of areas in my life that I can set some better boundaries around that. So that's what I'm going to work on this week, is setting better boundaries around those negative influences. And for me, it's technology. I love to play little games on my phone. And so I think that's what I'm going to really focus on this week. Lynn and I worked on some of that last week and we talked about it. So for me, I'm going to continue to work on that.
I think for me, it's really easy for me to allow my outside voice to be positive. It's the one that's inside sometimes that I have problems with. And so I think for me, I'm going to use my outside voice inside. Opposite
That's
of what
awesome.
my mom used to tell me to do.
I love that. That's awesome.
I'm going to use my outside voice inside me for a week and see where it goes from there.
I love it. What about you, Lynn?
I'm going to take a look at how I fill my days, the things that I have allowed into my life, take inventory of all those, and see what I need to replace.
I love that. Okay, folks, thanks for joining us this week. Your challenge this week is, where are you going to set your boundaries and how are you going to work on avoiding negativity? And we'll see you next time. Have a great week.
Remember to subscribe, all that stuff. We're supposed to say
all
that.
the goodies, yeah.
You've
Sorry.
probably done it already. If you're thinking about it or you're hesitant, just go ahead and do it. Yeah. If you don't like it, you can unsubscribe.
Yeah. But don't do that.
No, don't do that.
Because we're fun.
We are. And we love you.
Thank you for joining us on the Living God's Light podcast. You can help keep the show going through getting merch at livinggodslight.com or contributing what you think the show is worth on our website or by going through Patreon. Thank you for sharing your light with the world. You are making a difference, and we love you.